Chapter 47. In the Café de la Gare, near the railway station, Flick and Paul had a breakfast of Urset's coffee, black bread, and sausage with little or no meat in it. Ruby, Jelly, and Greta sat at a separate table, not acknowledging them. Flick kept an eye on the street outside. She knew that Mikkel was in terrible danger. She had contemplated going to warn him. She could have gone to the Moliere place, but that would have played into the hands of the Gestapo, who must be following Mikkel in the hope that he would lead them to her. Even to phone the Moliere place would have risked betraying her hideout to a Gestapo eavesdropper at the telephone exchange. In fact, she had decided the best thing she could do to help Mikkel was not to contact him directly. If her theory was right, dear Frank would let Mikkel remain at large until Flick was caught. So she had left a message for Mikkel with Madame La Prairie. It read, "Mikkel, I am sure you are under surveillance. The place we were at last night was raided after you left. You have probably been followed this morning. We will leave before you get here, and make ourselves inconspicuous in the town center. Park the van near the railway station and leave the key under the driver's seat. Get a train to Mars. Shake off your shadow and come back. Be careful, please, Flick. Now burn this." It seemed good in theory, but she waited all morning in a fever of tension to see whether it would work. Then at 11 o'clock she saw a high van draw up and park near the station entrance. Flick held her breath. On the side and right lettering, she read Moliere and Phil's Viandes. Mikkel got out and she breathed again. He walked into the station. He was carrying out her plan. She looked to see who might be following him, but it was impossible. People arrived at the station constantly, on foot, on bicycles, and in cars, and any of them might have been shadowing Mikkel. She remained in the cafe, pretending to drink the bitter, unsatisfying coffee substitute, keeping an eye on the van, trying to discover whether it was under surveillance. She studied the people and vehicles coming and going outside the station, but she did not spot anyone who might have been watching the van. After 15 minutes, she nodded to Paul. They got up, picked up their cases, and walked out. Flick opened the van door and got into the driving seat. Paul got in the other side. Flick's heart was in her mouth. If this was a Gestapo trap, now would be the moment when they arrested her. She fumbled beneath her seat and found a key. She started the van. She looked around. No one seemed to have noticed her. Ruby, Jelly, and Greta came out of the cafe. Flick jerked her head to indicate that they should get in the back. She looked over her shoulder. The van was fitted out with shelves and cupboards and trays for ice to keep the temperature down. Everything looked as if it had been well scrubbed, but there remained a faint, unpleasant odor of raw meat. The rear doors opened. The other three women threw their suitcases into the van and clambered in after them. Ruby pulled the door shut. Flick put the gear shift into first and drove away. "We did it," Jelly said. "Thank Gordon." Flick smiled thinly. The hard part was still ahead. She drove out of town on the road to Santa Cecile. She watched for police cars and Gestapo Citroens, but she felt fairly safe for the moment. The van's lettering announced its legitimacy, and it was not unusual for a woman to be driving such a vehicle when so many French men were in labor camps in Germany, or had fled to the hills and joined the Maquis to avoid being sent to the camps. Soon after midday, they reached Santa Cecile. Flick noted the sudden miraculous quiet that always fell on French streets at the stroke of noon, as the people turned their attention to the first serious meal of the day. She drove to Internet's building. A pair of tall wooden doors, half open, led to the inner courtyard. Paul leapt out of the van and opened the doors. Flick drove in, and Paul closed the doors behind her. Now the van was a distinctive legend, could not be seen from the street. "Come when I whistle," Flick said, and she jumped out. She went to Internet's door, while the others waited in the van. Last time she had knocked on this door, 8 days and a lifetime ago, Mikhail's aunt Internet had hesitated to answer, jumpy on account of the gunfire from the square. But today she came right away. She opened the door, a slim, middle-aged woman in a stylish but faded yellow cotton dress. She looked blankly at Flick for a moment. Flick still had on the dark rig. Then recognition dawned. "You," she said. A look of panic came over her face. "What do you want?" Flick whistled to the others, then pushed Internet back inside. "Don't worry," she said. "We are going to tie you up so the Germans will think we forced you." "What is this?" Internet said shakily. "I'll explain in a moment. Are you alone?" "Yes." "Good." The others came in, and Ruby closed the apartment door. They went into Internet's kitchen. A meal was laid out on the table. Black bread, a salad of shredded carrots, a heel of cheese, a wine bottle without a label. Internet said again, "What is this?" "Sit down," Flick said. "Finish your lunch." She sat down, but she said, "I can't eat." "It's very simple," Flick said. "You and your ladies are not going to clean the chateau tonight. We are." She looked baffled. "How would that happen?" "We are going to send notes to each of the women on duty tonight, telling them to come here and see you before they go to work. When they arrive, we will tie them up. Then we will go to the chateau instead of them." "You can't. You don't have passes." "Yes, we do." "How?" Internet gasped. "You stole my pass last Sunday. I thought I had lost it. I got into the most terrible trouble with the Germans." "I'm sorry you got into trouble. But this will be worse. You're going to blow the place up." Internet began to moan and rock. "There'll be me. You know what they're like. We'll all be tortured." Flick gritted her teeth. She knew that Internet could be right. The Gestapo might easily kill the real cleaners, just in case they had something to do with the deception. "We're going to do everything we can to make you look innocent," she said. "You will be our victims, the same as the Germans. All the same, there remains a risk, Flick knew. They won't believe us, Antoinette moaned. We might be killed. Flick hardened her heart. Yes, she said. That's why it's called a war. Chapter 48. Mars was a small town to the east of Reims, where the railway line began its long climb into the mountains. On its way to Frankfurt, Stuttgart, and Nuremberg, the tunnel just beyond the town carried a constant stream of supplies from the home country to the German forces occupying France. The destruction of the tunnel would starve Rommel of ammunition. The town itself looked Bavarian, with half-timbered houses painted in bright colors. The town hall stood on the leafy square, opposite the railway station. The local Gestapo chief had taken over the mayor's grand office and now stood poring over a map with Dieter Frank and a Captain Byrne, who was in charge of the military guard on the tunnel. I have 20 men at each end of the tunnel, and another group constantly patrolling the mountain, said Byrne. The resistance would need a large force to overcome them. Dieter frowned. According to the confession of the lesbian he had interrogated, Diana Coldfield, Flick had started with a team of 6 women, including herself, and must now be down to 4. However, she might have joined up with another group, or made contact with more French resistance cadres in and around Mars. They have plenty of people, he said. The French think the invasion is coming, but a large force is hard to conceal. So far we have seen nothing suspicious. Byrne was short and slight, and wore spectacles with thick lenses, which was presumably why he was stationed in this backwater rather than with a fighting unit. But he struck Dieter as an intelligent and efficient young officer. Dieter was inclined to take what he said at face value. Dieter said, "How vulnerable is the tunnel to explosives? It goes through solid rock, of course. It can be destroyed, but they will need a truckload of dynamite. They have plenty of dynamite, but they need to get it here again without our seeing it." Indeed, Dieter turned to the Gestapo chief. Have you received any reports of strange vehicles or a group of people arriving in the town? None at all. There is only one hotel in town, and at present it has no guests. My men visited the bars and restaurants at lunchtime, as they do every day, and saw nothing unusual. Captain Burns said hesitantly, "Is it conceivable, Major, that the report we received of an attack on the tunnel was some kind of deception, a diversion, as it were, to draw your attention away from the real target?" The infuriating possibility had already begun to dawn on Dieter. He knew from bitter experience that Flick Clariette was a master of deception. Had she fooled him again? The thought was too humiliating to contemplate. I interrogated the informant myself, and I'm sure she was being honest, Dieter replied, trying hard to keep the weight out of his voice. But he could still be right. It's possible she had been misinformed deliberately as a precaution. Pym cocked his head and said, "A train is coming." Dieter frowned. He could hear nothing. "My hearing is very good," the man said with a smile. "No doubt to compensate for my eyesight." Dieter had established that the only train to have left Reims for miles today had been the 11 o'clock. So Mikkel and Lieutenant Hess should be on the next one in. The Gestapo chief went to the window. "This is a westbound train," he said. "Your man is eastbound, I think you said." Dieter nodded. Bun said, "In fact, there are 2 trains approaching, one from either direction." The Gestapo chief looked the other way. "You're right. So there are..." The 3 men went out into the square. Dieter's driver, leaning on the hood of the Torian, stood upright and put out his cigarette. Beside him was a Gestapo motorcyclist, ready to resume surveillance of Mikkel. They walked to the station entrance. Is there another way out?" Dieter asked the Gestapo men. "No." They stood waiting. Captain Bun said, "Have you heard the news?" "No, right," Dieter replied. "Rome has fallen. My God. The U.S. Army reached the Piazza Venezia yesterday at 7 o'clock in the evening." As the senior officer, Dieter felt it was his duty to maintain morale. "That's bad news, but not unexpected," he said. "However, Italy is not France. If they try to invade us, they'll get a nasty surprise." He hoped he was right. The westbound train came in first. While his passengers were still unloading their bags and stepping onto the platform, the eastbound train chugged in. There was a little knot of people waiting at the station entrance. Dieter studied them surreptitiously, wondering if the local resistance was meeting Mikkel at the train. He saw nothing suspicious. A Gestapo checkpoint stood next to the ticket barrier. The Gestapo chief joined his underling at the table. Captain Byrne leaned on a pillar to one side, making himself less conspicuous. Dieter returned to his car and sat in the back, watching the station. What would he do if Captain Byrne was right, and the tunnel was a diversion? The prospect was dismal. He would have to consider alternatives. What other military targets were within reach of Reims? The chateau at Saint-Cécile was an obvious one, but the resistance had failed to destroy that only a week ago. Surely they would not try again so soon. There was a military camp to the north of the town. Some railway marshalling yards between Reims and Paris. That was not the way to go. Guesswork might lead anywhere. He needed information. He could interrogate Mikkel right now as soon as he got off the train. Pull out his fingernails one by one until he talked. But would Mikkel know the truth? He might tell some cover story believing it to be genuine, as Diana had. Dieter would do better just to follow him until he met up with Flick. She knew the real target. She was the only one who worth interrogating now. Dieter waited impatiently while papers were carefully checked and passengers trickled through. A whistle blew, and the westbound train pulled out. More passengers came out. 10, 20, 30. The eastbound train left. Then Hans Hess emerged from the station. Dieter said, "What the hell?" Hans looked around the square, saw the Stentorian, and ran towards it. Dieter jumped out of the car. Hans said, "What happened? Where is he?" "What do you mean?" Dieter shouted angrily. "You are following him." I did. He got off the train. I lost sight of him in the queue for the checkpoint. After a while, I got worried and jumped the queue, but he had already gone. Could he have got back on this train? No, I followed him all the way off the platform. Could he have got on the other train? Hans' mouth dropped open. I lost sight of him about the time we were passing the end of the Reims platform. That's it, said Deirdre. Hell, he's on his way back to Reims. He's a decoy. This whole trip was a diversion. He was furious that he had fallen for it. What do we do? We'll catch up with the train and you can follow him again. I still think he will lead us to Flick-Clariet. Get in the car. Let's go. Chapter 49. Flick could hardly believe she had got this far. 4 of the original 6 Jackdaws had evaded capture, despite a brilliant adversary and some mixed luck. And now they were in Internet's kitchen, a few steps away from the square at Sainte-Cécile, right under the noses of the Gestapo. In 10 minutes' time, they would walk up to the gates of the chateau. Internet and 4 of the other 5 cleaners were firmly tied to kitchen chairs. Both had gagged all but Internet. Each cleaner had arrived carrying a little shopping basket or canvas bag containing food and drink. Bread, cold potatoes, fruit, and a flask of rind of ersatz coffee, which they would normally have during their 9:30 break, not being allowed to use the German canteen. Now the Jackdaws were hastily emptying the bags and reloading them with the things they needed to carry into the chateau. Electric torches, guns, ammunitions, and yellow plastic explosives, and 250-gram sticks. The Jackdaws' own suitcases, which had held the stuff until now, would have looked odd in the hands of the cleaners going to work. Flick quickly realized that the cleaners' own bags were not big enough. She herself had a Sten submachine gun with a silencer, each of its 3 parts about a foot long. Jelly had 16 detonators and a shockproof can, an incendiary thermite bomb, and a chemical block that produced oxygen for setting fires in enclosed spaces, such as bunkers. After loading their ordnance into the bags, they had to conceal it with the cleaners' packets of food. There was not enough room. Damn, Flick said edgily. Internet, do you have any big bags? What do you mean? Bags. Big bags, like shopping bags. You must have some. There's one in the pantry that I use for buying vegetables. Flick found at the bag a cheap rectangular basket made of woven reeds. It's perfect, she said. Have you any more like it? No, why would I have 2? Flick needed 4. There was a knock. Flick went to the door. A woman in a flowered overall and a hairnet stood there. The last of the cleaners. Good evening, Flick said. The woman hesitated. Surprised to see a stranger. Is Internet here? I received a note. Flick smiled reassuringly. In the kitchen. Please come in. The woman walked through the apartment, evidently familiar with the place, and entered the kitchen, where she stopped dead and gave a little scream. Internet said, Don't worry, Francis. They are tying us up so that the Germans will know we didn't help them. Flick relieved the woman of her bag. It was made of knotted string, fine for carrying a loaf in a bottle, but no good to Flick. The infuriating petty detail had Flick stymied. Just minutes before the climax of the mission, she could not go on until she solves the problem. She forced herself to think calmly, then said to Internet, "Where did you get your basket?" "At the little shop across the street." "You can see it from the window." The windows were open, as it was a warm evening, but the shutters were closed for shade. Flick pushed a shutter open a couple of inches and looked out onto the Rue de Chateau. On the other side of the street was a store selling candles, firewood, brooms, and clothespins. She turned to Ruby. "Go and buy 3 more bags, quickly." Ruby went to the door. "If you can get different shapes and colors." Flick was afraid the bags might attract attention if they were all the same. Right. Paul ties the last of the cleaners to a chair and gagged her. He was apologetic and charming, and she did not resist. Flick gave cleaners passes to Jelly and Greta. She had held them back until the last minute because they would have given away the mission if found on the person of a captured Jackdaw. With Ruby's pass in her hand, she went to the window. Ruby was coming out of the store, carrying 3 shopping baskets of different kinds. Flick was relieved. She checked her watch. It was 2 minutes to 7. Then disaster struck. As Ruby was about to cross the road, she was accosted by a man in military-style clothes. He wore a blue denim shirt with buttoned pockets, a dark blue tie, a beret, and dark trousers tucked into high boots. Flick recognized the uniform of the milice, the security militia that did the dirty work of the regime. "Oh no," she said. Like the Gestapo, the milice was made up of men too stupid and thuggish to get into the normal police. Their officers were upper-class versions of the same type, snobbish patriots who talked of the glory of France and sent their underlings to arrest Jewish children hiding in cellars. Paul came and looked over Flick's shoulder. "Hell, it's a frigging militia," he said. Flick's mind raced. Was this a chance encounter or part of an organized security sweep directed at the Jackdaws? The militia were infamous busybodies, reveling in their power to harass their fellow citizens. They would stop people they did not like the look of, examine their papers minutely, and seek a pretext to arrest them. Was the questioning of Ruby such an incident? Flick hoped so. If the police were stopping everyone on the streets of Saint-Cecile, the Jackdaws might never reach the gates of the chateau. The cops started to question Ruby aggressively. Flick could not hear clearly, but she picked up the words mongrel and black, and she wondered if the man was accusing the dark-skinned Ruby of being a gypsy. Ruby took out her papers. The man examined them, then continued to question her without handing them back. Paul drew his pistol. Put her away, Flick commanded. You're not going to let him arrest her? Yes, I am, Flick said coldly. If we have a shootout now, we are finished. The mission is blown. Whatever happens, Ruby's life is not as important as disabling the telephone exchange. Put away the damn gun. Paul tucked it under the waistband of his trousers. The conversation between Ruby and the militant became heated. Flick watched with trepidation as Ruby shifted the 3 baskets to her left hand and put her right hand into her raincoat pocket. The man grabbed Ruby's left shoulder in a decisive way, obviously arresting her. Ruby moved fast. She dropped the baskets. Her right hand came out of her pocket, holding a knife. She took a step forward and swung the knife up from hip level with great force, sticking the blade through his uniform shirt just below the ribs, angled up towards the heart. Flick said, "Oh shit." The man gave a scream that quickly died off into a horrible gurgle. Ruby tugged the knife out and stuck it in again, this time from the side. He threw back his head and opened his mouth in a soundless cry of pain. Flick was thinking ahead. If she could get the body out of sight quickly, they might get away with this. Had anyone seen this stabbing? Flick's view from the window was restricted by the shutters. She pushed them wide and leaned out. To her left, the Rue du Chateau was deserted except for a parked truck and a dog asleep on a doorstep. Looking the other way, she saw, coming along the pavement, 3 young people in police-style uniforms. 2 men and a woman. They had to be Gestapo personnel from the chateau. The militant fell to the pavement, blood coming from his mouth. Before Flick could shout a warning, the 2 Gestapo men sprang forward and grabbed Ruby by the arms. Flick quickly pulled her head back in and drew the shutters together. Ruby was lost. She continued to watch through a narrow gap between the shutters. One of the Gestapo men banged Ruby's right hand against the shop wall until she dropped the knife. The girl bent over the bleeding militant. She lifted her head and spoke to him, then said something to the 2 men. There was a short exchange of barked words. The girl ran into the shop and came out with a storekeeper in a white apron. He bent over the militant, then stood up again, his face showing distaste, whether for the man's ugly wounds or for the hated uniform. Flick could not tell. The girl ran off, back in the direction of the chateau, presumably to get help, and the 2 men frog-marched Ruby in the same direction. Flick said, "Paul, go and get the baskets Ruby dropped." Paul did not hesitate. "Yes, ma'am." He went out. Flick watched him emerge onto the street and cross the road. What would the storekeeper say? The man looked at Paul and said something. Paul did not reply, but bent down, swiftly picked up the 3 baskets, and came back. The storekeeper stared at Paul, and Flick could read his thoughts on his face. At first shocked by Paul's apparent callousness, then puzzled and searching for possible reasons, then beginning to understand. Let's move quickly, Flick said as Paul came into the kitchen. Load the bags and out now. I want us to pass through that checkpoint while the guards are still excited about Ruby. She quickly stuffed one of the baskets with a powerful flashlight, her disassembled Sten gun, 6.32 rounds magazines, and a share of the plastic explosives. Her pistol and knife were in her pockets. She covered the weapons in the basket with a cloth and put in a slice of vegetable terrine wrapped in baking paper. Jelly said, "What if the guards at the gate search the baskets?" "Then we're dead," Flick said. "We'll just try to take as many of the enemy with us as we can. Don't let the Nazis capture you alive." "Oh my goodness," said Jelly. But she checked the magazines in her automatic pistol professionally and pushed it home with a decisive click. The church bell in the town square struck 7. They were ready. Flick said to Paul, "Someone is sure to notice there are only 3 cleaners instead of the usual 6. Internet is the supervisor, so they may decide to ask her what's gone wrong. If anyone shows up here, you'll just have to shoot him." "Okay." Flick kissed Paul on the mouth, briefly but hard, then went out with Jelly and Greta following. On the other side of the street, the storekeeper was staring down at the militant dying on the pavement. He glanced up at the 3 women, then looked away again. Flick guessed he was already rehearsing his answers to questions. "I saw nothing. No one else was there." The 3 remaining Jackdaws turned toward the square. Flick set a brisk pace, wanting to get to the chateau as quickly as possible. She could see the gates directly ahead of her. On the far side of the square, Ruby and her 2 captors were just passing through. Well, Flick thought, at least Ruby is inside. The Jackdaws reached the end of the street and started across the square. The window of the Café des Sports, smashed in last week's shootout, was boarded over. 2 guards from the chateau came across the square at a run, carrying their rifles, their boots clattering on the cobblestones, no doubt heading for the wounded militant. They took no notice of the little group of cleaning women who scuttled out of the way. Flick reached the gate. This was the first really dangerous moment. 1 guard was left. He kept looking past Flick at his comrades, running across the square. He glanced at Flick's pass and waved her in. She stepped through the gate, then turned to wait for the others. Greta came next, and the guard did the same. He was more interested in what was going on in the Rue du Chateau. Flick thought they were home and dry. But when he had checked Jelly's pass, he glanced into her basket. "Something smells good," he said. Flick held her breath. "Here's some sausage for my supper," Jelly said. "You can smell the garlic." He waved her on and looked across the square again. The 3 Jackdaws walked up the short drive, mounted the steps, and at last entered the chateau. Chapter 50. Dita spent the afternoon shattering Mikhail's train, stopping at every sleepy country halt in case Mikkel got off. He felt sure he was wasting his time, and that Mikkel was a decoy, but he had no alternative. Mikkel was his only lead. He was desperate. Mikkel rode the train all the way back to Reims. A doomy sense of impending failure and disgrace overwhelmed Dieter as he sat in a car beside a bombed building near the Reims station, waiting for Mikkel to emerge. Where had he gone wrong? It seemed to him that he had done everything he could, but nothing had worked. What if following Mikkel led nowhere? At some point, Dieter would have to cut his losses and interrogate the man. But how much time did he have? Tonight was the night of the full moon, but the English Channel was stormy again. The Allies might propose the invasion, or they might decide to take their chances with the weather. In a few hours it might be too late. Mikkel had come to the station this morning in a van borrowed from Philip Morier, the meat supplier, and Dieter looked around for it, but could not see it. He guessed the van had been left here for Clariot to pick up. By now she might be anywhere, within a radius of 100 miles. He cursed himself for not sending someone to watch the van. He diverted himself by considering how to interrogate Mikkel. The man's weak point was probably Gilbert. Right now she was in a cell at the chateau, wondering what was going to happen to her. She would stay there until Dieter was quite sure he had finished with her. Then she would be executed or sent to a camp in Germany. How could she be used to make Mikkel talk and fast? The thought of the camps in Germany gave Dieter an idea. Leaning forward, he said to his driver, "When the Gestapo send prisoners to Germany, they go by train, don't they?" "Yes, sir." "Is it true that you put them in the kind of railway cars normally used for transporting livestock?" "Cattle trucks, yes, sir. It's good enough for those scum, communists and Jews and the like." "Where do they board?" "Right here in Reims. The train from Paris stops here." "And how often do those trains run?" There's one most days. It leaves Paris late in the afternoon and stops here around 8 in the evening, if it's on time." Before he could progress his idea further, Dieter saw Mikkel emerge from the station. 10 yards behind him in the crowd was Hans Hess. They approached Dieter on the other side of the street. Dieter's driver started the engine. Dieter turned his seat to watch Mikkel and Hans. They passed Dieter, then to Dieter's surprise, Mikkel turned into the alley alongside the Café de la Gare. Hans quickened his pace and turned at the same corner less than a minute later. Dieter frowned. Was Mikkel trying to shake off his tail? Hans re-emerged from the alley and looked up and down the street with a worried frown. There were not many people on the pavements, just a few travelers walking to and from the station, and the last of the city center workers heading for home. Hans mouthed a curse and turned back into the alley. Dieter groaned aloud. Hans had lost Mikkel. This was the worst foul-up Dieter had been involved in since the Battle of Alam Halfa, when wrong intelligence had led Rommel to defeat. That had been the turning point of the North African War. Dieter prayed this was not to be the turning point in Europe. As he stared despondently at the mouth of the alley, Mikkel emerged from the front entrance of the cafe. Dita's spirits leaped. Mikkel had shaken off Hans, but did not realize he had a second shadow. All was not yet lost. Mikkel crossed the road, breaking into a run, and headed back to the way he had come, toward Dita in the car. Dita thought fast. If he tried to follow Mikkel, maintaining the surveillance, then he, too, would have to run, and that would make it obvious that he was tailing the man. It was no good. The surveillance was over. It was time to seize Mikkel. Mikkel pounded along the pavement, shoving other pedestrians aside. He ran awkwardly because of his bullet wound, but he moved fast and rapidly approached Dita's car. Dita made a decision. He opened the car door. As Mikkel drew level, Dita got out, narrowing the available pavement by holding the door wide. Mikkel swerved to dodge around the obstacle. Dita stuck out his leg. Mikkel tripped over his outstretched foot and went flying. A big man, he fell heavily on the paved sidewalk. Dita drew his pistol and thumbed at the safety catch. Mikkel lay prone for a second, stunned. Then groggily, he tried to get to his knees. Dita touched the barrel of the gun to Mikkel's temple. "Don't get up," he said in French. The driver got a pair of handcuffs from the trunk, secured Mikkel's wrist, and bundled him into the back of the car. Hans reappeared, looking dismayed. What happened? He went in through the back door of the Café de la Guerre. He came out of the front, Dita explained. Hans was relieved. What now? Come with me to the station. Dita turned to the driver. Do you have a gun? Yes, sir. Keep a close watch on this man. If he tries to escape, shoot him in the legs. Yes, sir. Dita and Hans walked briskly into the station. Dita buttonholed a uniformed railwayman and said, "I want to see the station master right away." The man looked surly, but he said, "I'll take you to his office." The station master was dressed in a black jacket and waistcoat, with striped trousers, an elegant old-fashioned uniform, worn thin at the elbows and knees. He kept his bowler hat on, even in his office. He was frightened by his visit from a high-powered German. "What can I do for you?" he said with a nervous smile. "Are you expecting a train from Paris with prisoners tonight?" "Yes, at 8 o'clock, as usual." "When it comes, hold it here until you hear from me. I have a special prisoner I want to board." "Very good. If I could have written authorization. Of course, I would arrange it. Do you do anything with the prisoners while the train is here?" "Sometimes we hose out the cars. Carriage trucks are used, you see, so there are no lavatory facilities, and frankly, it becomes extremely unpleasant. Without wishing to criticize, do not clean the trucks tonight, you understand? Of course. Do you do anything else?" The man hesitated. "Not really." He was guilty about something, Dita could tell. "Come on, man, out with it. I'm not going to punish you." Sometimes the railwaymen take pity on the prisoners and give them water. It's not allowed, strictly speaking, but no water will be given tonight. Understood. Deirdre turned to Hans. I want you to take Michael Clariot to the police station and lock him in a cell. Then return here to the station and make sure my orders are carried out. Of course, Major. Deirdre picked up the phone on the station master's desk. Get me the chateau of Saint Cecile. When he got through, he asked for Weber. There's a woman in the cells called Gilbert. I know, said Weber. Pretty girl. Deirdre wondered why Weber sounded so pleased with himself. Would you please send her in a car to the railway station in Reims? Lieutenant Hess is here. He will take charge of her. Very well, said Weber. Hold the line a moment, will you? He moved the phone away from his mouth and spoke to someone in the room. Giving orders for Gilbert to be moved, Deirdre waited impatiently. Weber came back on the line. I've arranged that. Thank you. Don't hang up. I have some news for you. This would be why he was sounding pleased. Get on, Deirdre said. I have captured an Allied agent myself. What? Deirdre said. This was a lucky break. When? A few minutes ago. Well, for God's sake, right here in Saint Cecile. How did that happen? She attacked a militian, and 3 of my bright young people happened to witness it. They had the presence of mind to capture the culprit, who was armed with a Colt automatic. Did you say she? The agent is a woman? Yes. That settled it. The Jackdaws were in Saint Cecile. The chateau was their target. Deirdre said, Reba, listen to me. I think she is part of a team of saboteurs intending to attack the chateau. They tried that before, Reba said. We gave them a hiding. Deirdre controlled his impatience with an effort. Indeed you did. So there may be more sly this time. Might suggest a security alert. Double the guards, search the chateau, and question all non-German personnel in the building. I have given orders to that effect. Deirdre was not sure he believed that Weber had already thought of a security alert, but it did not matter. So long as he did so now. Deirdre briefly considered rescinding his instructions about Gilbert and Michael, but decided not to. He might well need to interrogate Michael before the night was over. I will return to Saint Cecile immediately, he told Weber. As you wish, Weber said casually, implying he could manage perfectly well without Deirdre's assistance. I need to interrogate the new prisoner. I have already begun, Sergeant. Sergeant Becker is softening her up. For God's sake, I want her sane and able to speak. Of course. Please, Weber. This is too important for mistakes. I beg you to keep Becker under control until I get there. Very well, Frank. I will make sure he doesn't overdo it. Thank you. I will be there as fast as I can. Deirdre hung up.